In this story, I'm going to tell you how an unleashed neighbor's giant dog kept biting my rescue mutt, and the building looked the other way. But I didn't call for a dramatic showdown or break the law. I used one tiny surgical move, a hidden camera, a couple of signed affidavits, and a board meeting to force the system to make her leash, muzzle, and train the dog, and the footage I captured turned 2 years of fear into enforceable consequences. I am Ava Sinclair, 28, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I work at a small community arts center downtown doing marketing and event coordination, a job that pays the bills and lets me breathe when the city gets heavy. My office is a second-floor room with windows that face a brick alley and a mural of a whale that someone painted last summer. When things get too loud in my head, I look up at that whale and try to imagine all the small tidal things that happen beneath the surface. I have a steady routine. Walk to work with my battered leather messenger bag, stop for an iced coffee at the corner shop where the barista knows my order and scribbles a heart on the cup when the days are long, and come home to my quiet apartment and my rescue mutt, Miso. There are little rituals. Miso's wag before I unzip my bag, the thunk of his bowl being set down, the way he circles twice before choosing a sleeping spot, that anchor me when the city gets heavy. People tell me I have a calm face and sharp eyes, which is a polite way of saying I notice things others do not. I notice how the light falls across the stairwell at 7 in the morning, which apartment doors are always ajar, the scent of someone else's dinner in the hallway. For 2 years, an ugly shadow has lived in that building. My neighbor, Janine. She moved in a year before I did and immediately claimed the hallway like it belonged to her. Her Bernese mountain dog, Bruno, is enormous, loud, and loose. At first, I tried to be neighborly, to treat the whole thing as a fluke. Dogs are dogs, people have bad days. But Bruno is a dog that consumes space and attention. He barks like a small freight train and sheds in clumps. And Janine, his owner, treated rules like inconveniences. She left his leash drooping on a hook by the door. She let him lunge across the landing to meet anyone who went by. She was territorial in a way that bent the building to her will. Bruno has bitten Miso twice. The first time he tore a chunk of fur and left Miso trembling for days. The second time he broke my finger when I stepped between them. The memory of the second bite is still a raw seam along my hand, how the world tunneled into white pain and then a cold, incredulous numbness as the bone shifted. Janine shrugged both times, blamed my dog, and called me hysterical. When I knelt on the linoleum in the stairwell, cradling Miso and my mangled hand, she flicked her cigarette ash into the stairwell and said, "He's fine. You should keep him on a leash." It was a dismissal packed with menace because it suggested she could keep doing what she liked, and I had to shrink to survive it. I tried the polite route first. I talked to her in the stairwell the way you talk to an annoying roommate, quiet, reasonable, with an attempt at humor. I called property management. I filed a complaint after the second bite. Nothing changed. The building manager, a man who spoke in corporate half-promises, said they would send a notice. The notice stuck to the bulletin board for a day like a forgotten flyer from last year. Janine kept Bruno unleashed in common areas. My problem was clear. My dog was getting hurt and nobody took responsibility. My life felt smaller because I was always bracing for the next encounter. I started to skate around the building, time my walks to avoid the hallway at all, and I refused to let Miso out without me. The fear and the anger pooled together until I could not pretend it was just bad luck. It's funny what loneliness does to you. You think you can handle a neighbor, but you forget how present other people's indifference is until it tacks itself to every decision you make. Janine had become my nemesis, not because she was louder or meaner than most, but because she thought the rules did not apply to her, and she had hurt someone I love. I was unsatisfied with polite requests and reports that dissolved into nothing. I needed a way to make her face consequences in a way the management and the police never would. I wanted Janine to feel the inconvenience she had forced on me for 2 years, and I wanted to protect Miso without depending on other people to do their jobs. I tried to solve the problem the way a reasonable person would. Document, complain, escalate. I took photos after each incident, close-ups of bruised fur, the torn collar, the scuffed linoleum where Miso had been shoved. I got a medical note for my broken finger, 3 tiny X-rays, a splint that made me clumsy with a coffee cup, and kept a log of dates and times in a small spiral notebook I carried everywhere. I handed everything to property management and the regional animal control office. I asked neighbors if they had similar problems. A few had minor complaints. Bruno barks, Bruno jumps, Bruno scares their toddlers. Most were too weary to get involved. People who move into older buildings learn to tolerate whatever friction comes with it. One neighbor, Marisol, a woman who works mornings at the flower shop across the street, agreed to sign a petition if I put one together. Her signature helped, but the building manager called it a nuisance and said he could not evict someone over a dog unless there was a legal order. Animal Control sent a form letter promising to investigate, and then closed the case. The paperwork stacked up in my kitchen like a small indictment of how many institutions disclaim responsibility. I tried calling Janine directly, several times. She answered by accusing me of lying about Miso, accusing me of harassing her, blaming my dog for being small and provocative. Once she opened her door, Bruno barreled out and lunged at us. I cradled Miso and rounded the corner, my finger throbbing. She shouted that I should keep my dog at home and slammed the door so hard the frame shuddered. I realized I had reached the end of what official channels would do for me. I could see two clear paths, except that her threats and her unleashed dog would continue to shape my life, or do something active to interfere with how she lived, to turn the discomfort she gave me back on her. I thought about making noise, about calling animal cruelty lines, about finding footage that proved Bruno attacked. Every sensible option felt slow and impotent. The more time that passed, the more danger Miso would face. I felt cornered, and in that corner my anger started to change into a plan. The first few attempts to shake her were clumsy and made things worse. I started with small inconveniences, a knock on her door in the morning when she liked to sleep late, a loud voice asking about a phantom package. I left polite notes under her door reminding her of leash laws, but each note only escalated her rants and earned me fresh insults in the hallway. She began to shout at me from her balcony. Once she called Animal Control on me for harassing her, though they dismissed it as mutual neighbor drama. The notes and knocks made her angrier, and her anger made Bruno more unpredictable. I realized my petty efforts were not just failing to solve the problem, they were increasing the danger. One evening, after a confrontation where Bruno managed to slip past her and chase Miso into a neighbor's courtyard, I felt like everything might explode. I had been walking Miso earlier than usual because I wanted to avoid her. We met at the little side entrance anyway. Bruno charged. I pushed Miso behind me and felt the old fracture in my hand throb. Janine screamed at me like I had stolen something from her. Neighbors came out, but their voices were thin and unsure. Someone called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher said an officer would be out. We waited half an hour under a drizzle while Janine paced and Bruno circled, tongue lolling. I was sure this time an officer would finally write something substantial and make the building act. The officer arrived, listened, filled out another report, and left with a shrug. The same shrug that had followed my letters and petitions now sat in a file cabinet somewhere. The relationship with management grew colder. Janine started slamming her door in my face and left my trash bin uncollected by pulling the recycling out and dumping it in the hallway. Once she painted the narrow strip of lawn by her window neon green so it would snag the hem of my coat if I walked too close. She left toys, dirty socks, whatever she could lay hands on, in the stairwell to force me to step around them. Her actions were designed to annoy me, and they did. My attempts to make things better had backfired. Bruno became more aggressive under her stress, she retaliated, and the whole building felt more hostile. I could feel the edges of my life fraying where they passed the stairwell. The easy smile I gave coworkers, the patience I owed the barista, the gentle routines with Miso. I realized I had to make the final attempt a deliberate one, not a series of petty retaliations. I needed a plan that would be enforceable, quiet, and safe for Miso. I also wanted poetic justice, something that would use her own habits against her without endangering animals or people. So I began to watch her like a puzzle I meant to solve. What moves did she make? When did the building breathe? Where were the blind spots? Janine worked night shifts at a hospital and slept most days. She took a long walk every Sunday morning at the river and always left her apartment unlocked when she rushed out. The building's CCTV, where it existed, had blind spots in the alley and the stairwell. I spent nights mapping patterns, noticing what neighbors expected and what they ignored. I memorized slack times at the front desk, the manager's coffee break, the way the upstairs tenant always propped their door open for cigarette smoke. The anchor of my plan was one small, surgical inconvenience that would force property management to act. I discovered that the laundry room key, stored at the front desk, was almost always returned late. The manager angrily tracked keys but blamed tenants because he did not want to spend money replacing locks. I also learned that the building had a policy. 3 formal written noise or safety complaints required review by the board and could trigger a lease violation. I needed 2 more documented complaints filed by different residents to make the 3rd noise or safety complaint minor or moderate enough to force the manager to convene the board. It was not about vengeance for its own sake. It was about building a structure of evidence that could not be shrugged aside. I recruited allies slowly and honestly. I asked 2 neighbors who had been quietly bothered by Bruno to sign affidavits about specific incidents. I gave them my log and showed them the bite reports. They were tired, but they agreed. One was the barista from the corner shop, who had witnessed Bruno barreling down the hallway chasing a toddler and pulling a parent to the floor. The other was an elderly neighbor who had tripped over Bruno while carrying groceries. Their signatures made the complaints look less like the squabble of a single disgruntled tenant and more like a building-wide safety issue. I also kept up appearances with Janine, acting like nothing had changed when we passed in the hall, because overt hostility would ruin the plan. Quietly, I made sure every complaint was filed correctly, delivered by certified mail, and copied to the city animal control with a request for a formal inspection. The day I needed to execute the final step, I had a clean, simple move. Janine left for a 12-hour shift and, as usual, left her apartment unlocked, keys on the counter, shoes by the door. Bruno slept in the sun by the window, a great living pillow. I walked Miso 3 buildings over and came back after she left. I had one brief goal: secure evidence that linked Bruno to a pattern of dangerous behavior in communal spaces and force the building manager to face the board. I was not going to vandalize or harm her dog. I left no traps, no cruelty. Instead, I placed a tiny motion-activated camera in the hallway pointed toward the stairwell where Bruno liked to run. I clipped it near the smoke detector with a magnetic mount I had purchased weeks earlier, the same sort of small consumer gadget you find on pages promising home security for less than $50. It felt oddly theatrical when I pressed the record button, like tilting the stage lights on a poorly staged play. It recorded for 12 hours straight and captured 2 incidents. Bruno barreling down the hallway unrestrained around lunch hour while 2 people were exiting with groceries, and later Bruno squeezing out of the elevator without Janine and chasing after a skateboarded teen. The footage was clear and irrefutable. The way Bruno's paws skidded, the small child who stumbled, the elderly woman who clutched her bag and backed away. I downloaded the files on my laptop, made copies, and breathed for the first time in weeks. It felt less like victory than a relief, evidence that would translate shared anxiety into something concrete and actionable. I took the video file to the building manager, the animal control office, and delivered copies, along with the signed affidavits, to the tenants' association and to the property owner. I watched their faces. For the first time in 2 years, the building manager looked uncomfortable. He muttered corporate speak about liability and leases and said he would have to call a meeting. Animal Control opened a new file and promised to inspect within 72 hours. The tenants' association chair, who had shrugged at my earlier notes, called a meeting the next evening. Janine did not like people watching her. When the board convened, management played the footage in the small conference room. The evidence was sober and damning. Bruno in common spaces, no leash, close calls with children and elders. People who had previously shrugged now leaned forward like they were watching a train wreck and deciding whether to step in. Janine fumed and accused everyone of conspiring against her, but she could not deny the clips. The board voted for an immediate warning requiring Bruno to be muzzled and leashed in any common area and mandated professional behavioral training for large breeds, or else a formal lease violation would be issued. It was a structured, enforceable penalty with a clear path to remedy. The poetic consequence was that Janine, the woman who had weaponized her indifference, now had to spend her time and money proving her dog was safe. She was forced to show receipts for training, to produce a leash and muzzle, and to sign a behavioral agreement. The plan worked in ways I had not expected. She did not lash out further at me because the building now had an official rule they would enforce. My life and Miso's shifted from reactive fear to a safer routine. There was a small, surprising human result, too. After the enforcement, Janine started to mutter apologies when she saw me. They were half genuine and messy, but they were there. Bruno wore a muzzle for the first time when he left the apartment, and Miso could finally walk our normal route again without me scanning for danger every second. The building manager became more reliable because the board backed him up, and they hired a part-time security liaison to ensure the rule was followed. I felt satisfaction that was not simply vindictive. I had taken something poisonous and turned it into a lever for ordinary safety. The final twist came months later. Janine, forced to attend behavioral classes with Bruno, encountered a trainer who actually helped. Bruno calmed with consistent training and a steady routine. Janine, who had been brittle for years, began showing up to the meetings with water bottles and a quieter mouth. She never became friendly, but the hallway stopped feeling like a battlefield. The solution was not theatrical revenge. It was targeted, inconvenient for her, and proportionate. It made her take responsibility. I learned that the most effective vengeance was not about inflicting pain or humbling someone with public shame. It was about finding the lever in a broken system and using it to protect the vulnerable. I did not celebrate Janine's humiliation. I celebrated Miso's ability to chase a leaf again without me gripping his collar like a lifeline. If you ask whether I regret the path I took, I will say no. I wish we could have fixed it sooner without having to wage a covert campaign. But when institutions failed me and my dog was in harm's way, I chose to become deliberate. I became louder with facts, quiet with actions, and precise with consequences, and in the end the building returned my life to a rhythm where I could breathe.